All right, some stories on Israel here. Um, Talking about Israeli apartheid in uh, um, use a little AOC language in the micro and in the macro. In the micro, first, you had these two young boys who were beaten up and just treated poorly by Israeli troops. And it's just, goes to show how Israeli children are treated worse than dogs. You have here Mohammed and Mustafa Amiri, and they are, I think, 15 and 13 years old. And they did, this is when you say boys being boys. I know that there's some gross ways that has been used, but this is just boys setting things on fire and doing like kind of cool things, right? And so they watched a YouTube video and saw that if you mixed a couple of common household products together, I don't want to say it and get the video in trouble or anything. They say it in the article. I'm sure it's fine. But if you mix a couple common household items together in a plastic bottle, shake it up, throw it, like 10, 15 minutes later, it's going to pop, it's going to smoke. And I don't know. When I was a kid, I watched, a couple guys make them and do it. It looked kind of cool. I thought it was really neat as like a 12-year-old, but it's almost more of a science experiment than in any way a weapon. Now, like, the kids could have hurt themselves. I'm not saying like, I would enjoy if like, my children, if I had them, were out there doing that. But, this is one of those situations where at best, like, the police take the kids home and they're like, ma'am, your kids were out doing something dangerous, but that's not what happened, of course. So what happens is, they set off their little boom things, and then the IDF shows up, and they use some like military tactics to flank these two kids, which was just completely unnecessary. But when they do, they both try to run, and Mohammed, who's the older 15-year-old, gets away. And initially, but here's the soldiers beating up on his cousin, and so he runs back over, feeling bad being the older sibling. They take it out on the younger one. So they arrest them, don't call the parents, anything like that, take them to jail. And during the arrest, they were both beaten. Mohammed was grabbed by the ears and repeatedly headbutted with a helmet, and Mustafa was punched in the face. And if you're looking at the video, you can see a thing here. It's apparently these pictures were taken 2 days after it happened, and you can see that a good half of his face is fairly still swollen and purple. This little kid was definitely beaten up by the IDF. They claim, I think he fell while he was trying to run away or something like that. So they questioned these two boys again, 15 and 13 years old. Parents aren't there or anything like that. They're being questioned by the equipment, the equivalent of the Department of Homeland Security. This isn't like, the local sheriff asking what's going on, somebody they're in any way familiar with or anything like that. They also, let's see, then they were denied food. They weren't fed until the next morning. So this happened, I think, at about 5 o'clock p.m. They weren't fed until the next morning at 9 a.m. Absolutely horrific thing to do to kids. Like, not that they're necessarily going to starve to death or die of deprivation, but why would you do that to children? You offer them food. You're nice to them. They essentially labeled them as terrorists. They forced them to relieve themselves in a field rather than allowing them to use the bathroom like the way you treat human beings. Hours after they were arrested, Mohammed, seeing something he saw on TV, asked for a lawyer, said everybody in the room looked really surprised when he did and didn't really know how to react. But then they didn't let him call his family, but they called his family to say that, hey, if he's arrested and he's asking for a lawyer, which, the family up till that point actually didn't know over these 4 hours what had happened to these two young men who are cousins, not brothers. So I guess during Mustafa's initial questioning and being beaten, they forced it out of him that there was actually a third person there named Yusuf. And so when Muhammad was questioned over and over again, they kept asking him about this Yusuf. Muhammad, even though they allowed, the family to find a lawyer and everything like that, he was questioned before the lawyer got there. Yusuf, was not a real person. Just, whenever you torture a young person, they're gonna make something up. That's, they want to stop being beaten, they'll tell you whatever the hell you want to hear, right? That's why you don't beat little children. So they while they were detained, they also had their fingerprints and DNA's taken. Mohammed says that when they were put in prison, they slept on a concrete floor. They only had a thin mattress that was wet and a thin blanket. Just cruel, like ways that, like, if some, you had to take care of some dog, even if that dog bit somebody earlier in the day, you're not gonna throw them a wet blanket. That is just unnecessary cruelty, and it's a way of treating these kids worse than you would treat your pet. That way, when you end up killing them or displacing them or whatever the hell you're going to do, to rid them of out of their own homes, you don't feel quite so bad about it. So then they went to court. The court made the family pay a $930. That's American. It was 3,000 something shekels fine, and essentially gave them a deferred sentence of a year. Like, hey, you stay out of trouble for a year, but called it a hostile terrorist act that these kids had carried out. And so this is not the worst injustice that kids in Palestine face, but it is an injustice that's indicative of an apartheid state. And so I thought it was just, since it was published in Harats by Gideon Levy, I did want to take the time to go through it and just say, like, look, these are how these Palestinian children are treated. And it's a perfect example of apartheid and how it affects, like, individual families. The kids now talk about how they're having night terrors because of this. Now, one other thing I want to talk about when it comes to Israel, and that is Israel is building its first East Jerusalem settlement in 25 years, and it's been met with absolute U.S. silence. There's not like a whole lot of like news here. It is going to bisect and cut the West Bank in half essentially once this settlement and the other ones are completed over time. So I'm sure I'll be breaking that down time and time again as we get closer and closer to actually them completing all these settlements and really cutting the Palestinian West Bank in two. Now, people are calling it the death of the two-state solution. I think the two-state solution has been dead for quite a long period of time. But, this kind of thing where even East Jerusalem, which was proposed to be, the capital of a Palestinian state, right? The fact that they're settling this territory just shows that there's no interest in any way actually making a deal with the Palestinians and giving them their own state at the end. And it goes to show that, the, I guess, really nasty, like, ethnic decisions that the Israeli central planners are willing to make to put Palestinians in a position where it's harder and harder for them to maintain their culture and their society and, be able to travel like an hour away and go see your family, go to the weddings and shit like that, without having to go through checkpoints and everything. So that's the situation going on. A lot of important stuff, and just I think just two good stories to like kind of break down, like, a big picture, like numbers, like Israel is building 1,400 new settlements in the West Bank, but also what does it mean to be a Palestinian living in the West Bank, just to be an average child doing average child things and getting absolutely brutalized by a military police force because of it.